Oke, jadi sekarang aku lagi ada di ruangan salah satu ruangan study room di Perpus di lantai paling bawah. Dan karena 30 menit lagi aku bakalan ada presentasi di University of Minnesota SLA Graduate Symposium ini. Jadi kemarin submit proposalnya itu berdua, tapi teman sibuk, jadi aku ngerjainnya sendiri dan presentasi sendiri. Jadi begitulah. Okay, I'll give it a try. Can you see? Yeah. Okay, thank you so much for the chance given to me talking this symposium. And yeah, today I'm going to be talking about multilingualism and translanguaging, especially. Sorry, can you hear me now? Okay, sorry. So thank you so much for the chance given to me to talk in this symposium. Today I'm going to be talking about multilingualism and translanguaging, especially in the context of Indonesian EFL learning. And before we going right into this discussion and presentation, this is like a critical review or review of research of what is going on within this topic. Before we jump right into it, let me briefly introduce myself. My name is Dwi. I'm currently second year. I'm currently doing English MA at ASU, with specialization in writing, reduction literacies. My interests are around second language writing and linguistics and TESOL, and I'm currently working on my MA thesis about L1 Bahasa Indonesia and L2 English writing process with Indonesian students in the US universities as participants. And then, okay, now let's go to this topic of discussion today. A little bit of introduction, because before we talk about everything, I need to introduce you to Indonesia. So this is a picture. You see a globe, and in green colors, that's Indonesia. If you're not familiar with Indonesia, that's totally fine. But I believe most of you kind of like know Bali, because it's like one of the most visited place. If you know Bali, that you will likely to know Indonesia, because Bali is located in Indonesia. It's right around here. So Indonesia is actually really a big country. Like you can see here, like a couple of big islands. So we have like in total approximately like 17,000 ish island. So we have 5 of them big and so many of them like small islands. And because of that, we have like so many people living in different regions. So we are technically like ethnically really diverse. We have like 1,300 ethnic groups, and because of that, we also have like 600 ish traditional language that spoken by different people. And this is also like in total we have like 270-ish million population and keep growing. So with that being said, Indonesia is somehow like really linguistically diverse. Like we can assume like one person, it's really common that one person have three language in position. Like they have their traditional language or their local language where they talk in their region, and then they also have like national language, like the same language that we share as a nation, and then one foreign language that in most of the case it will be English, because English is like the most popular language. So that makes sense that the third language would be picked up by the people of Indonesia would be English. And then now let's go to the translanguaging. It is first introduced by Chen Williams in 1980-ish or 1990-ish, when he was doing observation in the classroom of Wales. In Wales, the teachers actually talking to the student in Wales, but somehow the students responding in English. So that's kind of like the phenomenon that William kind of recognized. And actually, the term is from Wales, but I don't know how to speak it. But it was later on translated into English. It becomes translanguaging. And then in 2009, Garcia can be considered as like one of the really pivotal scholars that can actually like introduce translanguaging topic to other scholars, because in 2009 in her book chapters talking about educational multilingualism and translanguaging in the 21st century, she actually contra like compare about recursive bilingualism and dynamic bilingualism, that like how different it is, people doing bilingualism in the past and right now, because there are so many things to be considered. There are so many things that can actually like need to be taken into account for bilinguals nowadays in 21st century. And then in Kanagarajan 2011, he actually like emphasizing that languaging is a natural occurring phenomenon, that which means that teachers do not really necessarily like put into extra effort to make the students actually do test languaging, because in fact the students do test languaging naturally. They just do it without even have like the encouragement from the teachers. So that's like really a natural occurring phenomenon. And then in 2018, Li Wei see test languaging as a practical theory of language by exploring Chinglish or China English and Shinglish or Singapore English, and concluded that multilingualism is actually what he argued as non-unilingual. So, which means that every multilinguals have more than one language, of course, in their head, right? So there seems to be really less time or even none time when they actually only have one language mode in their head when they talk or when they're think. And then human think beyond language. So there are so many things, again, so many things to be taken into account, like socially and culturally. Whenever a multilingual doing the translinguals, whenever someone talk with the language, okay. And then the method that I'm using here is content analysis by C and Shannon. So what I do is the studies should be like peer-reviewed journal that are representative enough for using EFL classroom settings. This is important because Indonesia is such a big country, so I try to select the studies that are kind of like at least near representative enough, because like I'm looking at the studies that have different settings, like in conducted in elementary school, junior high or senior high, high school, and also universities, because that's important. Other than that, also like the region, I purposely I intentionally look for studies that have different settings, like, oh, these studies conducted in the west part of Indonesia, central part of Indonesia, and east part of Indonesia. So I include all of those variables. Second of all, I'm looking for the expanding the use of L1 and L2 within the EFL classroom, or in other words, the translanguaging. Looking for that, and then the source data is specifically stated, and that leads to this research question. This research question actually is a guiding for this paper. First, I would like to see the how translanguaging contributes to helping the learning activities of the students. Second of all, how code mixing and code switching are used in class instruction as teacher strategies. Even though like code mixing and code switching is included in translanguaging, but translanguaging include more than that. But this is just like one of them or two of them. And thirdly, how does the pedagogical implication of translanguaging in a multilingual context? So based on those consideration, I found these studies, these selected studies to do this paper. Now let's go to the first result or findings, specifically talking about how translanguaging helps with the learning activity. So I classify them into two different classification. First is from the student's point of view, and second of all is teacher's point of view. For the students here, Emilia and Hafid, they did the study with 75 students as participants, and majority of the students actually found that uh, they actually use translanguaging, and it is really useful because translanguaging can actually help students to actually access their full linguistic repertoire, because as I mentioned before, Indonesian people actually have multiple language at the beginning because they have more than one, right? So during the process of English in the classroom, it is also like bound to happen that they will do the translanguaging, and that kind of translanguaging actually help like during the whole process of learning. So one of them like acknowledging their full linguistic repertoire. So they not only use the English, but they also use their Indonesian language and their local languages. Second of all is Puspitasari and Nyoman Manto with 50 student as participant. Translanguaging not only help learning process but also as empowering tool, because in most of the case like language is somehow like their identity, right? So when studying about foreign language, somehow people tend to like losing their mother tongue or their first language. But in terms of doing translanguaging practices, it means like the students and the teachers evolving in the process of empowering each other's languages. And then teachers here, Putrawan et al., did a study with 270 pre-service teachers, which is quite a lot. And participants have a natural perception of using one language separately in the classroom. So they don't really disagree, but they don't agree with the statement of separating the language. Like when you teach English, you just use English, you don't use Indonesian at all. They give like somehow sitting on the fence vibes, like they sitting on the natural side. They don't really give it a support, or they don't really oppose the idea. And the study is interesting because it advocates translanguaging into curriculum, because in Indonesia the curriculum itself like really encourage the monolingual system. When teachers teach it in English, teachers should use English all the time, something like that. So based on this study of looking for the pre-service teachers' opinion and like perception, it kind of like helping like in building of maybe another curriculum in the future. Those policymakers should actually consider this type of result of the study. And then Haronisa and Lukmana looking at 50 teachers as participant, and half of the participants preferred two languages, while one third preferred three languages. So I think I see there's a pattern of how teachers actually like doing their uh, teaching activities, teaching practices in the classroom. Some of them actually prefer to do only two, which is English and Indonesian language, and then the other they include three: English, Indonesian language, as well as the local language that is different in different places, different local languages. And then this also shows that Indonesian EFL classrooms actually already applying translanguaging practices, whether they realize it or not. And then Sahib et al., with three teachers as a participant, uh, found out that the teachers see translanguaging to be really helpful in terms of explanation when they explain the material, and then comprehension when they try to make sure the student actually get the point or the material, like checking their understanding, as well as building a really positive environment in terms of like a mood in the classroom, because students tend to have like better mood, better interaction with the teacher in the classroom activities when the translanguaging happening, because they feel like, oh, they can actually be part of the discussion, because it includes not only English, because students actually really diverse in terms of their English competence, right? So when translanguaging is incorporated, that actually like increase their participation. Now, the second role is how code mixing and code switching are used in class instruction as teacher strategies. So for Ariba and Pradita, they did a study with only one teacher as participant doing the self observation report with student which have L2 as Arabic and L3 is English. The study is actually unique because the setting is in pesantren. Pesantren Indonesia is like Islamic boarding school, so it's really focused on Islamic values. That's why the students not having foreign language as first foreign language as English, but first foreign language as Arabic. So they do the translanguaging. They switch the language not only between Indonesian and English, but it happens to be Arabic, English, and Indonesia. But interestingly enough, they do not really include their local language during the process of translanguaging in their school. And Saputra, with 10 students as participants, they found out that students actually aware of the translanguaging processing happening in the classroom by their teachers, but with really specific emphasis that they hope the teachers keep doing it, but with less Indonesian language, because they hope to like learn or like actually gain the knowledge of learning English, right? So they hope the teachers keep doing it, but with less Indonesian. And then Cahyani, with three teachers as participant, um, found out that intentional code mixing and code switching is actually helpful, because as I mentioned, code switching or translanguaging can be happen really unconsciously, but if the teachers can actually do those practices really intentional, it can be really helpful in a way. Um, and then Wahyu and Anam did study in one teacher, with one teacher teaching first grade as participants. So this is elementary school because they're first grade. And the other thing that's unique with this study is that the study is happening in COVID time. So this is online, the online classroom observation. So they found out that languaging with multiple resources is actually need to be done, because it happening in online realm. So with also with the really younger learner of English. So when they do translanguaging, it's not enough with only code switching, code mixing, and talk the two languages at the same time simultaneously, but also they need to some sort of multimodal resources like drawing pictures, something like that, something that can be seen visually. And then third of all, how does the pedagogical application of translanguaging in a multicultural context? And for the students, uh, the study did somehow like recorded learner to learner interaction in the classroom. They did the classroom observation and found out that students tend to hesitate to use their local language. In this study, the example is Japanese, because this study is in the setting of Java Island, when people actually speak Japanese as their local language. It is interesting enough that students somehow feel hesitate or feel ashamed to use their local language, because they fear that when they actually include their local language in the classroom of English, their action will influence the English language action. So they feel afraid of that. And then Afriadi of Hamza, again with class observation, recorded talks in the classroom. And they found that the student use local language the least compared to English in Indonesian for text languaging. So it also proves that there is a pattern here, even though translanguaging include both all three of the language, English, Indonesian, and local language. But it seems to be the local language have a really little place in translanguaging, like very least proportion or percentage. In terms of the teacher's point of view, Raja and Ngadiso with 50 teachers participant, they found that half the participants, half the teachers use English and Indonesian language. One quarter prefer the language, and the rest prefer to use English only. It's interesting that this the least percentage of the teachers, they prefer to use English only. So even though like there is somehow like the policy that should or encourage the teachers to teach English with only English, but the reality in the classroom in is that very little teachers actually like want or willing to do it with like teaching English with only using English. And lastly, Afridi and Hamza, they did the recorded talks in classroom, and the reluctance of using local language might have something to do with government regulation, as I said again. This is going back to monolingual ideology, monolingual educational policy, that somehow government think that when teachers teaching foreign language for students, it's better for them to actually only talk in English, not including Indonesian language or local language, and that's why somehow the students feel like reluctant and going back to Rasman, like hesitate to actually include their local language. So what can we conclude from that? So conclusion and discussion from this studies that languaging as alternative to monolingual EFL classroom instruction. So these studies really evidence that we can actually recommend, or we can actually push the government or each educational policy where they only apply monolingual ideology in the EFL classroom. Second of all, languaging helps students comprehension and class interaction. because it has been proven, because it's better to use so many language, because that's what happening, that's what actually the students have in possession, because that's how their student works, how multilingual brain works. So it's actually better to do translanguaging. Third of all, translanguaging enabling access to full linguistic repertoire and access to full communication forms of the students. So communication is not only about the language, but also about so many things. About also, as I mentioned, about mood. So when the teacher can actually build the mood perfectly by having like inserting some certain of like local language context that students can actually relate to, they can actually have can better understanding of the EFL classroom materials that being delivered. And then task languaging is natural and inevitable in the multilingual classroom. So it is, as I said again and again, it is what is going on with multilingual students, and we need to accept that. So task languaging is really helpful. And lastly, task languaging can be both student-led and teachers-led. So teachers can actually come up with their action for like encouraging or inviting students to the task languaging, or it can be also happen the other way around. Students can actually lead the happening process of phenomenon of translanguaging in the classroom. And these are my references, and these are some of my contacts if you want to connect. Thank you, and terima kasih. Terima kasih is Indonesian language for thank you. Yeah. Mhm. What do you mean by third language? Yeah. Oh, okay. Based on my readings of the studies, so in some cases when like the teachers can actually found the term that they think that this term can be translated into Indonesian language or even local language, and then this term actually can actually help students better understanding, they will use it. Or sometimes even in some studies they actually put in humor, that this humor cannot work in English, but it can work perfectly in local language. And that's why like in order to like make sure the student get the point, the student can somehow do it. And in addition, because I also have teaching experience, 3 years teaching experience in Indonesia, I tend to have I tend to follow this monolingual ideology. I feel like it is better to teach my students with only English so that they can do better with English. But after encounter with these studies and this topic, I feel like I've been doing something wrong, and maybe I should reconsider. And in fact, in some cases, in my previous teaching experience as well, I feel like I it is I somehow consciously or unconsciously include my Indonesian language and my local language in order to like, because in order to maximize the understanding of the material and being trying to deliver to students, I think it's better sometimes to use this, like we take the English and then we take the context with an incorporate with Indonesian or local language, local culture context. So yeah. Thank you so much. Come, come, please come. Thank you.